Avoid stamp masking with this very simple technique. Hi, I'm Amber Rain Davis from NotableInk.com. Welcome back to the channel. For the benefit of our beginners, let's talk about stamp masking. What is it and how to do it? Stamp masking is a technique where it creates a layered appearance of your images on your card. So if we look at this image in the very front with the seeds, it's stamped in the forefront, and all of the other images appear to be stamped behind that image without any overlapping stamp lines. To do that, you have to create a mask for that image in the front and any other images that are going to overlap. I'll show you how to do this. You can either use stamp masking paper, post-it notes, post-it tape, or you can even use scrap paper and some temporary adhesive to create your mask. I'm going to layer images from my Fanciful Flora clear stamp set. This is also available in a digital stamp set, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I have some dye ink here. When you're doing stamp masking, you want to use an ink that's going to dry quickly because you're going to be layering images on top of each other. The first image that you want to stamp is the image that you want in the forefront, the one that is going to be the full image in the front of the bouquet or arrangement that you're making. Next, you want to stamp that image again on your masking paper or scrap paper, and then you're going to fussy cut that image. You're going to cut all the way up against the line or even slightly inside this stamped line. You don't want to leave a white border around the stamp, which is what you would get if you used a die, a steel die, in order to cut out your image, because then you're going to have a gap in between where your stamps overlap. So cut really tightly up against the image. After fussy cutting is complete, peel away the backing paper and you're going to adhere this stamp mask to your stamped image, so directly on top of it. Then I'll choose another image so you can see that this leaf, this fern, goes behind that little seeded flower, we'll call it. So I'm going to line that up. And I'm going to stamp that on top of the mask. So the mask is going to cover up our stamped image, and you can see how those lines are all overlapping. So if we didn't mask this, it would kind of look like a hot mess, right? So I'm going to stamp this. Now I neglected to fussy cut the right side of that fern, and so you're going to see that my entire stem isn't going to stamp out. So I'll remove my mask so that you can see that the fern is stamped behind, and then also part of the stem of the other flower is stamped behind. So this is what stamp masking is. Now these two cards that you see here, I actually didn't do any stamp masking with because these were made with digital stamps. So one way that you can avoid stamp masking and save yourself some time is to use digital stamps. Here you can see this digital stamp, which is the Photo Floral stamp set. The image is created of an outline and a white silhouette. So because those two are grouped together in one image, you can stack a bunch of those images on top of each other, print it out with or without a background, and not have to mask any of your clear stamped images. So if I'm going to cope at color, I prefer to use digital stamps so that I can completely avoid masking altogether and not have to worry about my ink drying. But in today's video, I'm going to show you my all-time favorite technique to avoid stamp masking with clear stamps, and we'll create these two slimline cards together today. Before we get started, take a moment to like and subscribe down below. I have an 8x10 gel plate here, and I have it on a 9x11 stamp mount. That's one that I got from Joggles. I like to keep my gel press on the stamp mount, and then I just put the piece of acetate that came with it on top of it, and this is how I store my plate. I'm going to grab my 5x7 gel plate as well. A lot of times when I'm using my 8x10 gel plate, I'm still getting used to the amount of paint I need to use, and I often have extra paint on my brayer. So you can either off brayer onto a piece of paper or deli paper, or you can also use a secondary gel plate, and then you can pull another print from that. So that's what I'm going to do today. And you can see I have my 5x7 gel plate on a stamp mount as well. I will have all of the supplies linked in the description below. Here I have Schminky Sap Green acrylic paint. This is a new color to me. I love it. I absolutely love it. I love it so much more than my Amsterdam sap green because this is a warmer sap green. It's also really translucent, which is a super cool property. And this is the first time I'm using it, but I've wanted this paint for a really long time and I could not figure out where I could order it in the United States. If you know where I can order this in the United States online, or if you're in Orange County, California, and you know where I can buy it in a store, do let me know in the comments down below because I'd love to know. Now I'm using ocean green acrylic paint, and this is just one that I picked up from Hobby Lobby. This one is semi-transparent, so it's not totally transparent. You can see it's a little more opaque than the sap green. And then I have greenish yellow from Amsterdam, and this one is a little more semi-opaque. So they're just all slightly different. I can see that I have a translucent area there, so I'm just going to add a little more of that ocean green, and I'll add a little more sap green to the bottom as well. Super thin layers of paint here. You can see how thin it is because I want to do a lift technique with my gel plate and my stamps. So I'm going to let this paint dry, and I've pulled out my Fanciful Flora stamp set. You can get this in clear stamps as you see here or digital stamps on my website at notableink.com. And I'm going to place the largest stamp down on the gel plate. So again, this paint is pretty much dry. It's a super thin layer, and I'm going to gently press this down, and then when I remove the stamp, it's going to lift away the paint. It's going to completely remove the paint that's on there. Now, if you have too much paint on your plate or your paint is too wet, you're not going to get a great lift, but here you can see the entire stamp image was removed. And that's the look that I was going for. You'll see as I stamp these mushrooms a second time, because I already have acrylic paint on the mushrooms, you're going to get more of a grungy look with the second stamping of it. And that's because there's a little dried paint on the stamp. You can set these down face down on a damp baby wipe or cloth, or slip them into a tray of water until you can clean them with just some warm water and a little bit of mild soap will do the trick. With this lift technique, there's no need to mask. So I'm not doing any masking. I'm over stamping. I'm kind of stamping on top of each other with these images. And because gel printing already has that grungy texture and you don't necessarily get a perfect pull, it's totally okay to do that. And so stamp masking to me is a very long and arduous process. It's not something that I really enjoy doing, even if I already have the masks available. Like if I buy a stamp set that already has masks with it, I still don't want to do it. So if I can find a technique where I can completely avoid the masking, I definitely want to do that. And this is one of my favorites. So I put down some white acrylic paint, and just to wet all of that paint again, it's a really thin layer of white acrylic paint, and I've pulled the print, and you can see that this shows up great. Now you could also do the same technique and get a similar look as if you used white embossing powder. If you didn't want to do the gel press technique, you had a background you wanted to use, you could try using white embossing powder, heat set one of the images, stamp another one on top of that, and just knock off the excess powder. But you guys know I love gel printing, so this is my go-to technique. Now, looking at this, I could split this into a slimline card and an A2 card, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that later. I wanted to pull another print, so this time I have cobalt blue and sap green. And I'm just going to mix these colors together, and you can see I have very little paint on the plate. You can see my glass mat underneath it, so super transparent. This time I've put my stamp on a stamp block. I tend to press too hard on the gel plate when I use a stamp block, so that's why in the first print that I pulled, I just kind of stuck the stamps to my head. It's a brand new stamp set, so they're super sticky, and so I could just stick them to my hand and that worked just fine. But sometimes I press too hard and it muddles the image a little bit when I use a stamp block on the gel press. So I'm just letting this sit a little bit. There's already some old paint on this plate, and I want to make sure I have good adhesion. This print ends up being more grungy than I intended. You can see that I got a really good lift technique with the stamps, but when I pull this print, you can see a lot of that paint is left over. The print that you see next to this is one that I did off camera, and instead of using white paint as my last layer, I used that ocean blue, which is why you can see the stamp images that I lifted are blue instead of white. I was a little bummed out about how much white was left over on this piece, and I wasn't sure where I was going to go with it, so what I decided to do was just crumple it up, because I didn't want to give up on the piece. I thought it had some nice stamping on it, and I wanted to add a little bit more texture to this and add some color to some of those white areas. So I crumpled it up so that I would have some higher areas and lower areas, those peaks and valleys, and I'm taking some gold pigment ink and just rubbing that over the surface super gently, just so that the gold catches on those higher areas of the paper, the peaks, and just to add some additional color. I ended up tearing that piece in half, which you can see the two pieces here, and I chose the darker piece because I liked the greater contrast on the one that I have on the left. And you can see I took that 8x10 panel and cut that into the slimline and an A2 card. We're going to assemble the two slimline cards now, and you can see that I have my art journal note stamp set here. We're going to use those sentiments in today's cards. That stamp set is also available in a digital version as well, so you can print a ton of sentiments off in one go and just cut them up as you need them. So I have some just white glue here, and I'm going to glue this down, and I'm going to just gently adhere it to the card panel, because I don't want to smooth it out and get rid of all the wrinkles. I like the peaks and the valleys. I want to keep those, so I'm just going to gently press the glue down. Now, if you remember, I still have that other half of this print, and I decided I wanted to use that for sentiment strips. So I'm going to take two of the sentiments from the art journal note set, and I'm going to use the back of that paper, the wrinkled up paper, to stamp my sentiments. And then I'll just tear those up instead of cutting them, so they have that nice organic look and appeal to them. Pretty much anytime I'm stamping sentiments, I'm using the Alt New Obsidian pigment ink. This stamp pad is still going strong, and it just stamps beautifully. It's crisp, it's clean, and it's super, super black. So I love it. So I'm just going to tear this up, and then I'm just going to checking the placement. I think it's a little bit long on the left. I'll tear that. And I'll stamp another one of the sentiments. And then I decided to stamp, so the same stamp that I have on the background that I use the lift technique for, I'm going to stamp that in just black and white on cardstock. I was thinking that I was just going to use it as black and white, but when I put the composition together, it just was lacking color. So I've pulled out Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Markers, and I'm going to do a bit of coloring here. Now, normally I would color with Copic markers, but I stamped this in the pigment ink, and that would have just smeared all over the place. It's not a Copic safe ink, so that's why I chose the Faber-Castell markers. And they worked great. I hadn't used them before. I bought this set of markers because these are permanent inks in these, and they're pigment inks, and you can use them on top of your acrylic paints when you're doing your gel prints, and they're going to be permanent. They're not going to reactivate if you decide to use another wet medium over them. So I'm just using a few of the colors. I did add a little bit of shading with that orange marker off camera, and I added a little white dot with a Posca pen to add a highlight back to those little seeds in the middle there. So these other elements that you see here, those are actually from the Fanciful Flora digital stamp set. And what I did with the digital stamp set is I went ahead and printed off an entire page. You have the individual stamps, but you can also print off an entire page of the elements. And I printed it on tissue paper. And I just had those laying on my desk already. Otherwise, I would have shown you the whole sheet. These were just leftovers from another project. So I decided to add those in there as filler, and we're just getting this all composed and glued down. And I love the look of that. So I was about ready to give up on that gel print, but I love how this card turned out. I like all the layers and the texture. So looking at how organic that card looked, this slimline panel just looked really stiff with the cut edges, so I decided to tear it. If you tear the paper towards you, you'll see the white core of the paper. If you tear it away from you, what you'll see is the colored edge, and you won't see that white edge. I wanted the white core of the paper because I just like the look of that, but tear it however you prefer. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to like and subscribe down below. I like those torn edges much more, and the weight around the edges as well. And so I've gone ahead and adhered that down, and I'm going to stamp 2 sentiments here from that same stamp set. And if you take a look at these images, you can see that, again, with that grungy kind of distressed texture, it doesn't really matter that I didn't mask the stamp set. The images are overlapping each other, and you can't really tell, and it's not really something that's super noticeable. Now, I feel like this card is just lacking dimension. There's so much dimension and layering going on the card on the left. So I've decided to use this A2 card panel. We've got all the, it's a nice arrangement that I have there, but this card needs something extra. I also didn't like how I stacked those 2 sentiments. I wish I had offset them. So I'm going to go ahead and add more interest to this card by fussy cutting a couple of these images and popping them up on the card. That's going to add the needed dimension and just kind of bring your eyes focus down to the bottom of the card rather than, I don't know, I just feel like the 2 sentiments up there are a little bit awkward the way that I positioned them. I wish I had moved Make Your Own Magic to the left a little bit, but I can't change that at this point. So I love the way that that looks. I think it looks much better popped up, and I'll go ahead and cut out the mushrooms as well. And I played around with these mushrooms forever to try and figure out where I wanted to put them. Ultimately, I put them on the right of the other element that's popped up, and I think that that's where it looked best. It kind of stacks over the mushrooms that are already there and adds a double layer of them. Look at all of the texture from the gel printing. I'm telling you guys, gel printing is one of my favorite techniques ever. I know my audience consists of card makers and art journalists, so I'm going to try and do videos for both of you guys, but of course these techniques can translate to your preferred surface. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I'll see you guys real soon in the next video.